Thanks for joining. So we're going to talk today about I think some things a lot of people are thinking about right now. A year after everybody had to retreat from home and made a bunch of purchasing decisions about equipment that people needed in order to work from home, and then a bunch of organizations, I'm sure, put spending on hold because of the uncertainty and to work through all of the challenges that were and the unknowns associated with how COVID was going to impact business. And so now we're back into the mode of, maybe we're going to be heading towards whatever our new normal is, and how do we start budgeting for the buying cycles and necessary to keep current with technology. So we're going to have Josh take you through several items, several good discussion points. As always, while we can talk about this stuff for definitely for the 25 or 30 minutes that we'll be together, we can talk about it for hours. We would love to be able to answer your questions. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to use the Q&A icon in the Zoom control window. Post your question there. We will try to get them answered throughout the discussion. And chat is always an option as well to get in touch with us to let us know if you have a question. So Josh, take us through some of the typical things that you hear from organizations, some of the guidance that you give them, and some interesting tidbits that maybe some people don't think about as it relates to budgeting and buying cycles and some of the value behind having a good plan around that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, overall, organizations, I think, are best served when, they're establishing budget for the next fiscal year. And what it really boils down to make sure that you're proactively staying ahead of the technology curve, really boils down to asset management. And so today I'm going to go through kind of a run through of how do you establish that asset management best practice, and get everything systemized, predictable, to a point where when that budget cycle comes and you have to go through that processes, you can just hit the easy button and everything will work. And I think everybody kind of has different approaches. Different business cycles dictate different approaches. Different roles within the organization dictate different life cycle replacements. So we'll go through all that today, and hopefully our listeners gather some insights that can be implemented into their business to help them with their budgeting cycles. So why don't we just hop in? First of all, what's kind of the risk associated with not appropriately managing your assets? And these can show themselves as symptoms across the business in a number of ways. First of all, we've got the threat actor on the upper left. As everyone knows, security is a multi-layered approach, and you're going to have, services, contracts for software. You're going to have hardware devices and firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems that are part of that protection system. If you're not staying on top of this stuff, there's a security risk. Also, if you're not investing, managing those assets proactively, you can go past a mean time between failure, which means the likelihood of, a piece of technology that's critical to the business, you could get surprised by. And then, that surprise is it down, you don't have a support contract on it, so it's difficult to replace in a timely fashion. And that downtime costs, potentially a lot of money. And then, money going down the drain, if you're not managing these assets and staying ahead of a life cycle, are people using desktops or laptops that are past their serviceable life cycle? Maybe you're using older operating systems or older applications that is really ruining the productivity of your staff. Potentially also, tarnishing that customer experience, and potentially, impacting revenue generation. And then, some of the internal waste that organization will suffer on the lower right here. Getting into, the older hardware, older systems, problems with integrating, problems with desktops just starting to fail. And then all of a sudden your internal support costs and break fix, start to go up. And that IT group, or business partners, instead of focusing on those value added projects, are just kind of band-aiding things until you get to a point where you're ready to replace those life cycle assets. So let's first start out taking a look at, kind of what is that best practice for asset management. We all go through this cycle, and this cycle happens, on a variety of assets, right? And what are those assets? And we'll go through in a little bit more detail in a bit. But these could be contracts, service contracts. They could be maintenance renewals. They could be the hardware across the organization, access point switches, firewalls, all that kind of stuff. Printers. It could also be, hardware as a service, infrastructure as a service, and those types of things. So you got to kind of capture what are all your assets. Where are you going to track these things, right? Because you have to have a vehicle for keeping tabs of all these assets, where they are in their renewal process, what are your projected life cycles, and all of those. Then we need some level of governance. How are we going to maintain that asset list to make sure that at any point in time, when you as a leader in the organization get ready to put that budget together, that you're not at a point where you have to go back, do investigation, because the entire year your team hasn't been updating a system to say who got new desktops. So really kind of that governance is important for maintaining it. You have to determine what the serviceable life cycle is for those. So we have to figure out, and it could be, like I said in the opening, dependent on role, dependent on business, what those systems are used for. And then how much time do you need? Basically runway. Different for every system. Desktops, laptops. Most organizations now have that down to kind of a predictable experience. But how long does it take to replace an ERP system? As well as that impacts the serviceable life cycle. Maybe a desktop or a laptop is 3 years. But an ERP system, the cost to move is a lot different. So that might be a different serviceable life cycle. So something to keep in mind as you review those assets. And then how do I budget to ensure assets are providing value? And, really instead of assets, they become liabilities if they start to, impact productivity, cause waste and everything like that. So really need to, set that budget to stay ahead of the technology curve. First of all, we talked, the technology assets, and basically I do 3 different groupings. What are those service contracts that you have with business partners? That could be telecom, managed services. What cloud services do you have for any web hosting? Your domain registration. These things in my mind are considered assets, and you have to put them in the budget from a standpoint of staying ahead of the curve and making sure these renewals happen. Same thing with software, right? You want to have a complete listing of all the different software applications and potential renewals that you have for all of them. And then, of course, and the most obvious that people think when it comes down to asset management is the hardware. Servers, desktop, laptops, mobile devices, firewall switches, access points, that kind of stuff. Talked a little bit about asset data governance. You're going to need to find out what is the right location of that asset master data. There's a lot of, IT service management tools and asset management tools that you could look at, that have applicable data fields to manage for all these different assets, right? Life cycle time frame, retirement date, projected retirement date, time frame for being able to procure and install those assets, so you give yourself a little bit of run room. The location could also be a business partner, right? So maybe who you're sourcing a lot of those technology assets from could potentially help you as a partner. You have to establish the required data elements per asset, right? And those hardware assets, as I talked about, are different than service contracts. And you do have to give yourself time to be able to replace those. You got to do all the data entry, so that's going out, it's capturing all of the assets. If there are new assets to the portfolio over a budget year, you're making sure that you're doing the data entry as you go during the year. And then, what are those processes to ensure accuracy? If you're using an SMB, managed service provider, fantastic. They can be a part of that process. If you have your own internal team, when are they touching things, right? Things are going to go bump, laptops are going to get damaged. When they replace that asset, they need to make sure that that spreadsheet is kept updated throughout the course of the year. And really, if you have good processes, that's going to make the budget that much more streamlined.
Hey, Josh, let me jump in to interrupt. You mentioned software earlier, and a question came in that, I think people understand hardware because at some point it just kind of slows down and there's new features that are out there, and I think everyone kind of understands that has a useful life. But how do you make that determination on software applications, other than when the developer of the software says we're no longer supporting your version?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So when it comes to software, I like to review those portfolio of different software applications that are supporting the business on a yearly basis. And, jumping forward into, some of my future slides, giving yourself 90 to 120 days prior to the start of the next fiscal year lets you review all the different software applications that you have in the stack. And, through that budgeting process and interfacing with management and building transparency into what your plans are for the upcoming fiscal year, they should be a part of, discussions around what applications aren't meeting your strategic needs. So definitely, less of kind of a hard life cycle replacement and more of kind of a soft review of the portfolio of applications that you're using. There's evolution of technology, revolutionary technology that comes out as well. And these things need to be kind of compared to your existing stack, and then kind of budget numbers around what does it cost to move. So good question. Thank you, Jeff. And then, right into establishing life cycle. And, it is kind of asset dependent, like we talked about, and we just, got done discussing the software life cycle and how you can do that. But it also, kind of depends on the role within the organization. As an example, somebody that is an intern that was hired for, finance doing data entry, they likely don't need a computer that's bleeding edge technology. But that same organization, might also do engineering, and they might have, a SolidWorks CAD designer that every 2 years needs a new laptop because, it's just a productivity issue, and they recognize the value in doing that. So not a lot of easy answers there. But what I have had success with in the past is kind of grouping individuals within an organization. And then layering that over the top and saying, hey, these roles, if they have a laptop, they're going to need a faster replacement cycle. And keeping all that information in the asset master data is going to help you when that budget time comes, just to be able to say what assets are coming of their life cycle termination that we need to be looking at renewing. And service contracts, telecom keeps getting cheaper. There's lots of managed services options. Really with those, kind of a yearly review ahead of contract termination date. And even looking at, do you need to provide notice on those contracts and everything like that. Another thing to consider in establishing life cycle, technology, and this was applicable to the number of transistors on a circuit board, Gordon Moore, 65 years ago, but still applicable today. Technology is continuing to accelerate. Things are changing. You have to stay ahead of that curve. Watch for mean time between failures. Certain pieces of hardware just aren't built to last. If you have spinning disks in desktops, laptops, or servers, those are going to fail more often than like an SSD. And then, look for revolutionary technology. And, when it comes to, software, this could be another thing as well, where all of a sudden a new product comes out. You looked past that hype cycle and there is really some good information that you're being provided that could differentiate the value proposition that you serve your customers. So something to look for.
Josh, a question just popped into my head. I'm sure everyone is wondering this.
Yeah.
Is the founder and creator of Moore's Law, is that a relative of yours?
Uncle Gordy.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Good.
Yeah. Thank you. Plan time for replacement. Give yourself enough run room to be able to get business partners involved and be successful. So, and then, are you on a business growth or decline? If your business is growing, it might make sense to have a faster life cycle replacement. If it's declining, and you need to leverage assets a little bit longer, and you're willing to accept that risk, that might be a part of your life cycle planning as well. So, yay, it's budget time. Thank goodness we have the easy button, right? Because we've been doing those things all year long that are going to lead us to a simple budget process. I said starting 90 to 120 days before. Everybody's, most organizations I run into, fiscal aligns with calendar. And let's face it, end of November, Thanksgiving, you've got Christmas and New Year's coming up. If you're fiscal and calendar, I'd shoot for 120 just to make sure that you have enough run room. And that's not only for you, but leverage those business partners, right? Give them enough time to be able to come to the table, assess your current solutions, and be able to recommend things that are potentially those game changers that you could be implementing the next budget year. Asset report by lifecycle replacement date. So, we talked about the data systems. Smaller organizations might be managing it in Excel. You could create a pivot table to get that data. Others with more sophisticated systems, you can just run reports to say, hey, what are my assets that are due to be replaced next year? And then, taking that list, going to market, getting those business partners to quote. And then I've got a couple tips coming up to help you simplify and optimize that buying process. Put your business partners to work. You don't need to do it all yourself, but make sure you're giving them enough notice. Again, make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to replace. And then once you have all of those numbers for the replacement, you can then, create that budget. And what I do is, when I'm creating it monthly, quarterly, you're kind of laying out what is that plan for expenditures. That allows for, you to have transparency with the leadership team across the organization and be able to adjust accordingly. And, funny little story, one year I was working for a large retail organization, and the line item budget for hardware replacements for end user devices came in about $95,000. And the CFO and I sat down to talk through the budget numbers, and he told me he needed to have me cut that budget number in half. And I said, well, you just made our 4-year replacement cycle an 8-year replacement cycle, if that's what you want to do. Right. And it's having some of those hard conversations with management and guiding their thought processes into, hey, you can make these cuts, but there's risk associated with doing that. And obviously an 8-year replacement cycle, that's going to cost a lot of waste across the organization, money going down the drain. So, and then I thought I'd finish, 5 ways to simplify that asset management and budgeting process. First, leverage a managed service provider to assist with asset management and budgeting. Right. At a levity, I'll speak with respect to our services. We have the tools available to be able to enter in contracts, software, hardware, and store those with the dates that need to be replaced, so we could help have transparency. With our relationships with manufacturers as well, a lot of those serial numbers and stuff, we can look up warranty replacement dates and everything like that. And that can tie into the support experiences that you have with us. And then when it comes to budgeting, VCIO services, things like that, they can really help come to the table to talk through what does an appropriate budget look like for the next fiscal. Simplify your technology supply chain by consolidating. I see a lot of organizations get into this trap where they look for the cheapest deal out there, and then all of a sudden they're spreading out, they're buying dollars across a multitude of businesses that may not have their best interest in mind long term. Right? They're looking for a quick transaction. The term business partner is there and established because you want to make sure those people that you're buying from are trusted advisors and are in that ecosystem of being able to help you long term. So, kind of my recommendation is, where possible, consolidate that buying. Look for coterminous contracts and agreements. For organizations that have multiple facilities, maybe they're growing through acquisition. Look for opportunities to, instead of having 5-6 different contracts with a single provider, what can you do to minimize the total number of contracts that you have in order to make managing those a lot more simple? This has been a trend for quite some time. So shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but really moving from a capital to an operations budget. I've found that when organizations are doing capital investments, they want to leverage those assets for as long as they can. And it's a dangerous space to be in, right? Because all of a sudden, when it comes to that replacement cycle year, maybe it's a bad year. They don't want to spend that money, but you're going to eventually pay it on the back end with broken hardware, outdated equipment, software and support failing with some of those providers. So when you have when you switch over to that operating model, hardware as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, then all of a sudden you're partnering with these business partners, and those systems are being updated, they're being maintained. Then the business has to chase a certain revenue mark to make sure that they're covering their operating expenses. So great way to be successful in the budgeting process. And then, consolidate purchases quarterly, monthly. And not only is this going to help you, with not having to each week, look and go out and buy and receive and deploy. If you start to consolidate those events either quarterly or monthly, you can start to streamline some of the rollout processes and decrease the disruption to business cycles. So, and then you're setting yourself up for success at a later date too, from the standpoint of, 3-4 years down the line, when that recycle or that life cycle comes due, you've already got it to a point where it's that quarterly replacement. And thus just you're burning less cycles in the purchasing process. So, I think that was the content that I put together for today. Pretty good overview of best practices for asset management, as well as how that can tie into a successful budget and helping you with your budgetary cycles. Jeff, do you have any additional questions?
We have like a minute left here just before we can wrap up, but I am curious if you have any interesting anecdotes, funny stories about outdated equipment or interesting situations that you've uncovered or been part of in your career.
Yeah. So I was in the aerospace industry and director of IT over there, and one of the systems that when I first came on board, UPS system, right? Absolutely critical for maintaining uptime of your server environments. And initial inspection, the UPS was running, and it was perfectly fine. First power failure, we found out that they had put inline power on, and the decision was made because the existing UPS wasn't able to support the workload. So instead of addressing it and getting in a model to lifecycle replace that one due to business growth, they just decided to turn it off, and it was not a pleasant surprise bringing up a virtual environment after an unexpected power failure. So, and there's a lot of other examples I could share that less funny, more kind of disastrous. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing not only the story, but all the good information. Thanks for everyone for attending. We do have a quick little code here that Josh has pulled up in order to claim your coffee card, your gift card. So scan that with your phone using the camera app, or type that string into a browser to claim your card. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend. We do have some upcoming events that if you go to alevityit.com/events, you can sign up for. If you'd like to learn more about budgeting and asset management, you can go to alevityit.com/assessment, fill out a quick little form, and that will get to the right people. We'll get it to the right people to get in touch with you. Of course, you can always reach out to your client success team, your VCIO, or anyone at Alevity. We'd be happy to help. So thanks again, Josh. Everyone have a great weekend. We will talk to you again.
All right. Have a good day, Jeff.
Thanks.